Hi everyone, welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Mayra Crosthwayt, and I want to welcome you to my workshop, Keys to Learner Autonomy, where we will be discussing very interesting things about autonomy in the classroom. I would like to start my talk by sharing this quote by Thomas Frank with you. Uh, Thomas Frank is a millennial YouTuber, podcaster, author, and software developer whose work is based mostly on productivity, learning, and habits. And he has this very interesting thing to say about autonomy. I think there's great potential for autonomy, but we have to remember that we live in a world where people may have free will, but have not invented their circumstances. The reason why I really like this quote, and I chose it to open the workshop, is because it taps into two central concepts of autonomy. First of all, the exercise of our free will and the capacity that we have to create our own circumstances. Now, bringing this concept down to learning and education, we know that education models have always been required to adapt to the development of society and technology. Our students always have the challenge to adapt to these developments. And as teachers have the challenge to help the students adapt to these developments and in reference to their own needs as well. So autonomy plays a major role in 21st century education, and autonomy is actually more than just a skill. Autonomy represents one of the great advantages of our time. If you are a Generation X or earlier generation, I am Generation X, but if you are X or any earlier generation, you will agree with me on the fact that back in our time, it was not as easy as it is today to build on your own career and to build on your own learning experiences. In our time, autonomy was a skill that benefited those who seemed to have a natural flair for it. Nowadays, it is actually a very important employability skill, commonly known by recruiters as self-management. It is important that our students understand that autonomy is a demand from the real world. It is actually one of the soft skills that the professional world gives more importance to nowadays. So students should be able to transfer these soft skills to their professional and personal lives. It doesn't matter what stage of their learning they may be at the moment. These skills will have a long-term impact in their lives. I also believe that English is one of the subjects that benefits the most from the concept of autonomy, as learning a language takes a long time. We all know this. And if we are able to foster sustained autonomous behavior in our students, this will have long-term benefits for them. As I said earlier, the labor market needs free will at its best right now, as the present workforce demands for creativity, innovation, self-management, and social responsibility. So having said that, I want to go to the big question: what it takes to be autonomous. What can we actually do? So I want to discuss this in a twofold manner. First, I want to discuss what is on the surface of autonomy. So on the surface of autonomy, we can describe an autonomous learner as someone who accepts the responsibility of their own learning and addresses his own learning needs. This would also be a student who knows how to choose and apply learning resources, and also a student who's able to manage strategies to work towards objectives. So that would be like the most on the surface definition for it. However, if we go at deeper levels, I would say that autonomy is actually a right we have. It is a right we have to the recognition of our potential, the awareness of our free will, and the vision of the future that we want to create for ourselves as members of a society. Autonomy takes getting to know yourself, knowing how you communicate, how you collaborate, how you contribute to the world. Knowing yourself will allow you to recognize and showcase your talents and abilities. It would also help you value your own accomplishments. So we can help ourselves be autonomous learners by developing a sense of responsibility, self-esteem, decision making, and problem solving. Also, critical and creative thinking skills are a great part of autonomy. So these skills can help students be on the way of finding their passion if they haven't found it yet. We also want to be proactive. It takes proactivity, it takes braveness in dealing with all the challenges and difficult circumstances that we may have in a class. For example, in an English class, there are natural risks like talking and probably making a lot of mistakes, but we need to be confident to do it despite all the multiple mistakes that we make in one class. So this is just to respond to the question of what it takes to become an autonomous learner. And actually, a little bit in a different order, I left the most basic question for the last. What is autonomy? So in that sense, how do we define it? I think that all the things that I have previously said define autonomy. However, what is autonomy in education, in the context of teaching that we live in? And what I want to say here is that education should not be viewed as an individualistic phenomenon. Our lessons are still collective experiences where we bring the best of ourselves into the classroom and for our communities. So autonomy may be understood by students as doing whatever they want. Maybe they have said this to you in the classroom, but this is very far away from a real concept and definition of autonomy. Autonomy is positive and constructive freedom, which can ultimately have a very positive impact in our communities. In this case, our learning community, which is our classroom. Autonomous learning does not get the teacher free of their charge. This may be another common misunderstanding. Autonomy instead takes the teacher to enact different roles at different stages in the classroom, depending on what is happening within the autonomy process. We are going to actually delve deeper into that in the next minutes. So the teachers may play different roles at different stages, but in the end, the teachers may actually catch a breath and observe how their students have become autonomous and independent, individually proactive, and capable of deciding goals, planning their own learning experiences, strategies, activities, and more importantly, evaluating their own process. So having said this as a brief introduction, I would like to present to you something very interesting that I discovered, and that is actually the autonomous learner model. The autonomous learner model, or better called ALM, was created by Professor George Betts and Jolene Kircher in the late 80s, early 90s. And this model was created in order to promote autonomy exclusively in gifted students. And they wanted to take these gifted students towards independency and self-directed learning. And it is actually quite interesting to me to see how this methodology is created exclusively for the gifted. And now, as I go through the process of the methodology, then we are in a century and in a time where we are all gifted people. And I think we have been gifted with access to information like never before, different ways of doing things and different ways of communicating. So I will be presenting you this module, but I'm gonna be brave to revamp it a little bit. So if we had a look at the most strict definition of the autonomous learner model is what you can see on the screen. It says that, let's read this together. Autonomous learning represents a situation in which the learner chooses aims and purposes, sets goals and chooses materials, methods, and tasks, exercises choice and purpose in organizing and carrying out the chosen tasks. The student chooses criteria for evaluation. All of this not depending solely on the role of the teacher in the classroom. Now, this is the 20th century definition. The way I would probably reword this would be something along these lines. Autonomous learning represents the situations where the learner chooses aims, purposes, goals, materials with the support and surveillance, not surveillance, but the support and observance of the teacher, which is really important. So nowadays, in our present time and context, It's not for the gifted, it's for everyone. It's what the market is asking from us. And it should be a collaborative phenomenon in the classroom. So having said that, I would like to go to my next idea. What is the autonomous learner model? Let's have a look at it as to how it was presented in the late 80s by these two researchers and writers. And it actually adapts very well to what we need in the 21st century. So as you will see, around the autonomous learner model, we have different concepts like orientation. I love how everything begins with orientation. Orientation is refers to the understanding of our personal talents, our gifts, our intelligences, our creativity as the beginning of the rest of what we're going to need in the process of becoming autonomous. It is about group building activities. It is about self and personal development, and it is in alignment with program and school opportunities and responsibilities. Also, a common misunderstanding is that when we want to foster autonomy, we may be constrained by the curriculum. And yes, this is actually one of the challenges that we may be presented with. However, this is not working outside of the curriculum or against the curriculum. This is flowing with the curriculum. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. So we all begin with the orientation, our gifts and our talents. Then we go into our individual development, where intrapersonal skills and interpersonal skills come into play, the use of technology, the involvement that we have in our careers or our areas of studies, how we are productive, and we have organization skills. Then, as you can see on the next aspect of the wheel, we have enrichment activities. These are further explorations because autonomous students should be able to investigate, engage in cultural activities, in public and social services, explorations, and so on. Also, an autonomous learner is expected to attend seminars. Now, considering that this was thought just for the gifted, maybe they didn't know that we would come to a time where seminars would be available 24/7 for us, considering the technology that we have. So it is attending at seminars, looking at problematic situations, controversial issues, general interest issues, and gaining advanced knowledge on those aspects that are very relevant to society. Then the model finishes with suggesting an in-depth study of whatever field of study we're in. And that includes individual projects, group projects, mentorships, presentations, and of course, a very important aspect of autonomy would be assessment, the concept of self-assessment. In my next slide, I have the same information, but just presented to you in a more linear way so that you can see how the autonomous learner model can progress in a classroom or in a term or in a month or however you want to implement it. Because this is the exercise of our free will, we as teachers can also decide which are the good moments to implement this type of model. So once again, from orientation, understanding your students' talents into in-depth studies. So what I'm going to do next is that I am going to be showing you some ideas to create an environment of autonomous learner. It is important that apart from planning activities to develop autonomy, we make sure that our class gives our students that pertinent environment for autonomy to thrive and flourish. So how can we create the environment for autonomy to thrive? Well, the first concept that I'm going to give you is availability. What do I mean by availability? Availability is allowing the students to have access to good information. This is also one difference from how it was in the past to now. Because we have abundant information, all the information that we have access to may not be quality information. So we have to be sure that the students have that quality information available, because the quality of the input they get is definitely a must. So our students need access to and availability to understanding what they have to do, but not just what they have to do, but how they have to do it and what with they have to do what they have to do. So they need to have all these resources available, like support resources, models. They should also have spaces for practice available, spaces where they can rehearse, correct mistakes, reinforce knowledge, or anything else that they need. These spaces should be available in our classes. The second aspect that we need to take into account to create a positive environment for autonomy is creating meaningful activities. So these meaningful activities are the motivation behind the activities that we do, which may connect to students' relevant projects or present aspects of their lives. So how we maintain activities meaningful and relevant is going to be very important to creating an autonomous environment. The third concept is control and choice. The students should feel that they have control to a certain extent. They should feel that they are also able to select the tools they're going to be worked with, to be given options as to how to organize their time or resources. They should feel that they have an understanding and a certain control of their learning process. And choice is also a very interesting thing. Students may want to feel that they have a certain choice in how they may want to approach an activity. I will show you a little bit more detail of this in a minute. So control and choice. The next criteria would be agreements. It is very important that we know how to establish agreements with our students, like time, deliveries, deadlines, and criteria for all the tasks that they do or deliver in the classroom. So agreements and open communication are very, very important. And also one of the most important ones is reference criteria. The students need to be very clear as to the criteria of what is expected from them, or what are their performance expectations on what autonomy really looks like. It is very important that you set the basis of what autonomy looks like and create a reference criteria for this. You may help yourself with rubrics or checklists that you and your students can generate together to make sure that you are all understanding what autonomy looks like and what we expect from it. Now, I would like to talk to you about the type of tasks that you can carry out in the classroom. For example, one of the first and favorite of mine would be content curation. Content curation can really foster autonomy, as the students are encouraged to finding their own information in the web. You know, we live in the era of the internet, in the era of information. Everything is available, as we were saying earlier. So in this type of activities, the students can cure content and they can justify their answers. This will enable them to take a deeper look into the content that you want them to learn. You may also create rubrics to assess and evaluate this type of content. And this actually has proven to be very interesting for my students. So I really suggest it on a very personal level. The second is a comparative analysis of this information. For example, we tend to consume a lot of video, no, or a lot of wikis, or even content from social media. So this is a part of content curation. Your students can do a comparative analysis of information, comparing text versus video references versus social media references. This actually has also proven very interesting to my students. The third suggestion that I have is writing reviews or writing critiques about a certain point or about a certain content. This will also allow your students to engage deeper in the subject of studies. So these were my reviews, my critiques, and doing demonstrations. What I usually do with my students is that after I go through the content curation and the comparative analysis, we give a demonstration of what good content and good information may look like. We do this through infographics, videos, photo stories, and all the available resources that we may have in the internet. Also, one of my favorites is case studies. Analyzing and studying cases may tap into their critical thinking skills. But it is actually more interesting to create a case. And you can create this case with your students, taking into account the current global issues and challenges that we have, or things that really connect to the real world. Because also, students feel more compelled to being autonomous when they feel that they have a good sense of connection to the real world. So this is just to give you a list of the type of tasks that you can carry out with your students. Now, let's talk about planning for autonomy. Planning for autonomy is basically student-centered planning. And it's about planning activities that should aim to raise awareness about autonomy with your students. One of my strategies is actually partial submittals. I want to tell you that this has been one of my most fruitful strategies, because I usually assess my students through projects, and I keep a portfolio of all their work. So sometimes what I do is that I divide a task into smaller tasks, and I allow them to give me partial submittals. This has proven to be effective because students feel that they have more control over the activity. They don't feel as rushed into the activity as they usually do. They feel that they have more time for additional resources or additional investigation. So you may break a task into 1, 2, or 3 or 4, depending on the task. For example, when we do writing, they normally finish the writing, they report back to me how they went about the writing, but then they ask me for more time to do a second revision. So in the first class, we check the strategies that they used for the writing, and then on the second review, we actually go to the writing itself. So these partial submittals allow for more understanding and control of the learning process. And as I was saying, my students do everything through displaying evidence. And when it comes to autonomy, guys, evidence is very, very important. They may display this evidence in a blog or a diary, or maybe of you already have some other tools where your students can showcase their work. But that is very important to consider in the lesson plan, the times with the partial submittals, the format of how things will be delivered. And something that I like to include is the element of choice. This is actually a proven pedagogical methodology if you want to look for further information on the element of choice. This is basically picking a central objective with a central activity, but giving the students the chance to choose. For example, they can give or show their understanding of a certain topic through a survey, through a report, or through an advice column. And I may give my students these 3 options. How do you want to do this? We can do it through a survey, we can do it through an interview, we can do it through a report, we can do it through a photo story. What are you going to choose? So this element of choice encourages the students and makes them feel also that they are more in control of what they're going to do and the result. The next that I have on this list is allowing the students for time management of specific activities. It is actually very important that in order for students to develop autonomy, they need to know how to use their calendars and their notifications in their calendars. Many students don't do this, but I have pushed my students into working with the notifications, and it has actually worked wonders for me. So time management with specific activities, with specific time, and always reminders and notifications can be a very good tool. Something important is that in your lesson plan, you include some of the critical thinking questions and the reflection questions that you're going to ask before, during, and after a certain task, so that you keep that aspect of self-assessment present all the time in your activities and your students become reflective. An autonomous learner is a reflective learner all the time. And the last but not least and very important one is to give the students a sense of community, because like I said earlier, autonomy is not just something that is about me. Autonomy is something that is about me, but that in the end has an impact in my learning community and ultimately in my society. Now, how to apply this module? Well, there are two ways in which you can do it. So I want to show you these two pyramids here. The first one begins with teacher responsibility and student responsibility. As you can see, teacher responsibility at the top, student at the bottom, or the other way around if you want to flip it. However, as I said at the beginning, I would definitely put them in the same place. But this is just a guide to start. So you can start with a focus lesson where you do things, where you serve as a model for your students, and then you give them guided instructions. Then taking them into collaborative aspects where they do it together, and they go do something on their own. This is, I think, what we commonly do in the classroom, but we can also invert this concept once in a while. You can actually start with something where students begin completely independent and self-accommodating to then accommodate to the group, and then to take down all the questions and the more complex things down to you. So this is just a good visual reference as to how you may apply the autonomous learner model. Now, I found something really interesting and fascinating online in my own research that I definitely want to share with you. And I want to recap that at the beginning we said that autonomy is something that is in high demand by companies nowadays. And as I was doing my research, I was actually quite surprised to find out that Apple, yes, the company Apple, is on top of the game and designed a methodology that is not completely new. Actually, when I found out this methodology, I think it's more like a reinterpretation of other teaching methodologies that we previously have. And I'm actually very surprised to see how they take this from mostly English language teaching. And this is Apple's challenge-based learning. And I want to close by showing you this model because I think that it clearly exemplifies everything that I have said so far and takes it down to earth and into the practical world. So let's have a look at this image where all the stages of the methodology are presented. So where does this come from? Let's begin by saying that Apple identified that many of the students who were going to become their potential workers seem to gain inspiration for autonomy from a deeper understanding of current issues, because it helps students explore and find their purpose in life. And this is why they begin with this module. Maybe some of you have seen the big idea, the big question model, that is actually a methodology called understanding by design. So this is not really new, but I think this is a very good adaptation from Apple. And it basically goes like this. We begin with a big idea. We begin with a big idea in society, something that is an ample concept, meaningful to society. I know that some of you may think, but it's very hard sometimes to create the big philosophical questions when we are looking at very simple language like verbs or adverbs or adjectives. But I'm actually going to walk you through the process, and I'm going to give you an example of what you can do with this. Because even the simplest idea in the world can be developed into a big question, into a big concept, and allow our students to have purpose behind what they do. So let's see, you start with a big idea. Then you move to an essential question. You have to pose a challenge that comes from that essential question and the big idea. As the students progress through the challenge, they need to have some guiding questions and guiding activities. And of course, guiding resources that they may find in the way. So this is where the students are compelled to self-organize and become really autonomous. They should also provide a solution to implement in regard with the big question and the challenge that we presented at the beginning. It wraps up with an evaluation and an assessment, and it usually goes into some form of publishing or some student reflection. But here is my example on how to apply it, you as an English teacher in a very simple class with a simple English textbook. And it may go down like this. Say, for instance, that you are teaching a pre-intermediate class where the topic of the unit is what we do every day, habits and routines for the simple present. One of the most common topics in our classrooms out there. Let's see, if I were teaching, I don't know, I'm going to imagine a group of teenagers or close to teenagehood. I can ask a question like, I can generate a big idea about habits. For example, I would start with a question saying, mm, how are your habits and routines different from those of the adults around you? And why do you think adults have different habits? A question like this may actually give some insight into how habits and routines shape our destiny, because everything we do on a daily basis has a great impact results in a longer scale of things. So it gives very interesting insights. Then I think that would be my big question. Why is it that adults and kids or teenagers may have different habits? Then, as a challenge, I would pose a question such as, how can we help families become better organized and have habits that are conducive to good family relationships? So we are going to create an advice column for families, maybe. For that simple challenge, you may create some guiding questions like, what is a good challenge? What is a good habit? What is a bad habit? And what would be the difference between this good and this bad habit? Some of the guiding activities could be exploring the habits of families in other cultures or around the world through guiding resources like wikis, videos, and so on and so on. For the solution and implementation stage, this is where we need very clear criteria, also for the evaluation and the assessment. And the evidence that we are going to present, how are we going to present evidence that we reflected upon the questions, that we actually went through some guiding questions, guiding activities, of the resources that we used, of how we organized ourselves to come up with this activity or to come up with this challenge specifically. Also, before the publishing aspect of this, which I said earlier can be an infographic or a report of any kind, it is important that their students get insight of the individual and the collective experience and how they can compare the individual to the collective experience. This will teach your students the importance of autonomy and the impact of autonomy for our learning communities. So as you can see, this model presented by Apple basically puts all the concepts of autonomy together, which is why I wanted to present it to you today. And let's recap now. What have we said so far? Well, evidence is key. How can we know if our students are being autonomous? How can they know if they are really working towards autonomy? Well, they need to have clear evidence of that in their agendas, in how they manage their notifications, in their portfolios of evidence, in their notebooks even, in classroom attendance, in all these places. And something I want to mention in order to do this recap very quickly, and why evidence is very important, is the challenges that we encounter when we try to foster autonomy in our classroom. And that is that sometimes I've heard from some teachers that they try to implement autonomy, but it seems that the students' will is just not there in the classroom, or that they tell them to study vocabulary lists on their own or certain grammar points on their own, and they never do. And this happens when they come to class. So my suggestion for this is going to be to keep communication as open as possible, and to also have persuasive communication towards the students. How is this persuasive communication? Is what kind of helps you sell the idea to your students of what autonomy is. So more than just telling them you have to be autonomous, you have to be autonomous, you got to give them the evidence of autonomy all times, what it looks like, what is a good model of autonomy, and which are the evidences that we have to that. Also, a very good way in which we can have persuasive communication is by, as I said at the beginning, giving them access to everything they need and asking them these reflection questions on how do you access the information, how do you analyze it, how do you go about it, how do you show your own mind and your own criteria. This actually has a big impact in students. This is something that I do with my teenage students, and I say, I want to hear the answer from the book, but I would like to hear something from your own mind, from your very, very personal criteria. And they seem to feel really challenged by this question, and they are willing to do that because they want to show their individuality. But for them to do that, they need to have access to all tools, information, and resources. Another thing is that the theory should be connected to the practice of things. And when I mean theory, for us English teachers, the theory is usually the grammar. But what about the theory of other topics? For example, as I was talking about habits and routines, what is the theory behind, or what is some knowledge behind a good habit or a good routine? What does psychology has to say about it? So the connection of the theory and the practice is also very important in the creation of autonomy. Next is the impact, to have your students assess and become really aware of the impact of their autonomous activities. What happened in the end? Like I was saying, comparing the individual activity to the collective activity or experience, and be sure to contrast them so that they see the impact that their autonomy has on themselves and their community at large. And finally, collaboration and tutoring. As I said, this is not a solo thing. Autonomy is not going solo. Autonomy is taking your best and putting it out there to collaborate with others. And having your teacher as your tutor, as your mentor at all times. As I was saying at the beginning, we may take different roles in different stages. So at the beginning, we may be more of presenters, controllers, but as the activities progress and as we work towards independence and autonomy, we need to become mentors and tutors. But we have to make sure that we are present in all the process of autonomy with our students, as we are definitely an essential part to the process of autonomy. So for our conclusions, autonomy should be for real life. Please make it as real as possible. Make sure that you create environments and experiences that will foster autonomy. Keep in mind that this doesn't happen in a day, that it's a big process, and that you have to stay patient and true to your goal and your objective, and become an autonomous learner yourself. That is going to be very important, because this is the way in which you're going to be able to show and model strategies, skills, and behaviors for your students. Also make sure that you challenge your students for greater purposes, considering all the necessities of society. So having said this, I want to thank you for watching my video and coming to my workshop. Please remember that at Gallery Teachers, we have useful websites for ELT resources and continuous professional development at galleryteachers.com. Actually, no. Learner autonomy is not a new concept. It was already being talked about in the 20th century. It was, however, seen as a skill relevant only to the gifted or people in leadership positions. So it was regarded as something special and unique. And now in the 21st century, it is actually a skill that everyone needs at every single level. So even though it's not really a new concept, it is a new concept that we need to learn to transform and adapt to the education and society of the 21st century. The reason why autonomy is very important in the classroom nowadays is because learner autonomy is actually a skill that will be demanded from our students in their professional lives. Most companies right now are giving a lot of importance to autonomy, which is considered as soft skills. And soft skills have gained a lot of territory, even over hard skills. And this is why it is very important for educators to make sure that autonomy is always present in their classrooms. Yes, and yes, and yes. Actually, this is a little, this can refers us back to the first question. In the past, autonomy was regarded as the students being left to their own devices. And now, autonomy should be a collaborative thing between teachers and students. Teachers should create the necessary environment and give all the necessary support for students to develop their autonomy.